I'd like to welcome now Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, former Commanding General of U.S. Army in Europe and a Senior Advisor to Human Rights First, a nonprofit, nonpartisan international human rights organization. Sir, thank you very much for joining us today on TVP World.
Thanks for the privilege.
Absolutely, anytime. So when we're talking about General Gromadzinski from the Euro Corps, his security clearance was pulled and he was ordered to return to Poland. I mean, we don't really have that much information, and we have to be careful at this point about what we say until we have more information. But just based on these few facts, do you think that it's likely that he is probably being accused of some type of espionage activity?
Well, your first point was exactly right. We don't know anything, and something as sensitive as this situation, it would be inappropriate for outsiders to make comments. All of us are constantly having to be checked so that we have proper security clearance. So, but I could not possibly offer any meaningful comment on this particular situation.
Right, and this could be in relations to a whole host of maybe other things. Well, now concerning Poland's internal security agency, which is conducting searches at this time, there are threads coming out of the Czech Republic as well as the Netherlands, uncovering a potential Russian network connected with Mr. Medvedev, Russian, Ukrainian oligarch who is now in Russia. Do you have any information on that you might be able to share with us?
Look, all of these things are a reminder that Russia will use every possible opportunity to exploit our vulnerabilities to create distrust. They certainly have done this in the United States. This is well known. They do it in Germany. They do it all over Europe through the use of either threats or money, disinformation to create problems for us. That's, and then we act surprised when we discover that there's a spy network in Czech Republic or in the United States that Russians are involved in our politics. Nobody should be surprised. The biggest surprise for me is that we continue to be surprised. I mean, this is who they are. For the Russians, they are at war. For us, we think, okay, maybe this could be a peacetime. Let's don't be provocative of the Russians. And they must laugh at us. So the sooner that we in the West pull our head out of the sand and realize that we are at war with Russia, that doesn't mean weapons, that doesn't mean nuclear weapons. What it does mean is that Russia will do everything they possibly can to undermine everything that we stand for, and we have to be serious about defending that.
I've heard comments amongst critics that Russians take advantage of the fact that they observe us here in Europe and see us discussing Russian issues and what they do and how they do it. And actually, we should be spending a lot more time just focusing on trying to protect ourselves and make us a little bit more immune to their activity. And I think that over the last few weeks, maybe even longer, we've seen a massive uptick in Russian activity here in Europe. And I think the situation here with Czech counterintelligence in cooperation with Polish counterintelligence and a few other countries is proof of that. And then the situation that is developing with the Polish Lieutenant General Gromadzinski is also evidence of that. Would you agree that this is also evidence that there are some cracks that need to be worked on, focused on a little bit more here in Europe?
Well, first of all, I would say that the investigation of General Gromadzinski is not evidence of anything because it's an investigation. And so I'm not going to comment on that or draw any conclusions from the fact that there is an investigation. I think that's inappropriate for anybody to do that. But yes, of course, the fact that Russia is continuously exposed, the FSB does not seem as competent as they used to be, but nonetheless, they are persistent and we are vulnerable. But I would never advocate for closing our open, liberal, democratic society. I mean, that's what gives us our strength. Of course, we have weaknesses because we are so visible, because news organizations question our elected officials. That's part of a democracy. But I would choose the vulnerabilities that come with that a million times over living in something like what Russia has, or in any authoritarian country where the media is controlled by the government. I mean, that's to me is a disaster, and we're much better off with the energy that comes from free and open debate and transparency in our institutions, even if that means it enables the Russians to kind of see and know who's going on. The burden is on our elected officials to build confidence and support in the population. Talk to us like we are adults.
Right, well said. I'd like to switch gears a little bit and ask about the recent missile that was fired that entered Polish airspace. And we hear from Polish officials that they saw the missile coming. It briefly entered Polish airspace for about 40 seconds, but they consciously made the decision not to shoot it down and to let it fly on to its target. In your opinion, would it be a provocation if Poland were to begin to shoot down missiles exactly like in that case, but not only, potentially maybe even missiles that come close to Polish airspace that still remain in Ukrainian, over Ukrainian territory?
Okay, so thanks for asking that. I think there's three things about this that are worth discussing. This is not just a purely military decision. It is ultimately a political decision. There's no doubt that Polish air defenders and Polish Air Force are competent and prepared to do whatever it takes to defend their Poland as well as their share of the alliance. So this is a political decision on whether or not to do something. That's one thing. And of course, I couldn't tell you that I understand all of the different considerations that political leaders would make. And Poland, of course, would have done. They would have done this, I think, probably in consultation with, or this scenario, I should say, the Allies would have discussed whether or not they do it. This was not the first time it's happened, obviously. So that's the first part, the political consideration. The second part is I believe that there's nothing that we do that actually provokes Russia. That they don't need provocation. I mean, for God's sake, they are doing everything they can to destroy everything that we care about. So they don't need provocation. Now, if we were to do something like shooting down that missile, of course they would complain about it. Of course they would talk about it was a terrorist, illegal, a provocation. They would threaten the use of nuclear weapons again. But they've been doing that from the very beginning. I mean, remember, they were threatening the use of nuclear weapons when the decision was made to provide Patriot or Stinger to Ukraine. So I think we spend way too much time worrying about what the Russians might do instead of focusing on how do we get the initiative, make them worry about us versus the opposite. The third thing I would say, absolutely, we should shoot those missiles down. We should be doing everything we can. I mean, we do it in the Red Sea. The U.S. Navy and the Royal Navy are in the Red Sea shooting down Houthi missiles before they hit international ships. Why aren't we willing to do this against Russian missiles that are in the air? I'm not talking about shooting Russian aircraft, but I'm talking about helping protect innocent people, Ukrainian civilians, and potentially Poles or Lithuanians or others should that missile, I mean, there's nothing that guarantees they won't make a mistake. Why, I personally believe we ought to be shooting them down.
I wanted to ask you about your opinion on the self-proclaimed president of Belarus, Lukashenko, and his little visit to the Suwalki Gap. What is your perception of that situation? Is it threatening? Is it something that we shouldn't worry about too much?
Well, what we should worry about is if the alliance is not prepared, if NATO forces as well as Lithuanian and Polish national forces are not prepared. I mean, you can look at the map and see it's a very narrow distance between Kaliningrad and Belarus. The the famous Suwalki corridor. There you have American troops, you have German troops, as well as Polish and Lithuanian that are in that area. And we have to constantly demonstrate that we are prepared. And the best way to prevent a conflict with Russia, to make sure that they don't think that they could actually launch some sort of attack through or with Belarus from Kaliningrad there in that region, just to create a scenario where they would then stop and say, NATO, do you really want to have a nuclear conflict over this little piece of Lithuania? We make sure that they never make that terrible decision. And that means you have to have ready forces. You have to have significant air and missile defense, because if the Russians have planned to attack a NATO country, that means they've already made the decision to launch missile strikes against all of our transportation infrastructure, such as Gdansk or Klaipeda. So we have to have missile defense to protect those things. And then finally, NATO forces have to be able to move as fast or faster than Russian forces to make sure the Russians see that we are prepared. And so the recent agreement between Poland, Germany, and the Netherlands to create this mobility corridor from the Netherlands up into Suwalki, I think was an important step, part of this process of ensuring that we can move as fast or faster than Russian forces. We should exercise this all the time. NATO's decision to approve regional plans was an important step. And I think Polish forces, as well as Lithuanian and others, should be practicing those plans over and over and over.
Okay, thank you very much, Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, the former Commanding General of U.S. Army Europe. It was great to have you on TVP World. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks for the privilege.